for a week will forget.
Drive safety.
Okay, ke a leboga ma. Sharp.
So we don't seem to appreciate enough, I believe, in South Africa, how white power is concentrated in the economic reality that we live in. And that then creates the ruling class as the white people who then controls everything, including parliament. That parliament, as we know, it can't make any laws that goes against the interests of white people. It is controlled by Stellenbosch. Stellenbosch doesn't need to be in parliament physically. It sends its agents. They create the false situation of fighting amongst each other, but in reality they are reproducing the same system. So if we look at some of the key moments which agitated us, Penny Sparrow, for instance, who called our people monkeys in Durban, were all very angry at the time, and she got a slap on the wrist and she went away. Now we are all up in arms because of this white woman who has said that we are worst, we are rapists, we must be killed, and our women's wombs must be ripped out because they give birth to black men who are worse than the pit bulls. And we are very angry against this white woman, and some political parties have even opened some cases. Now, you will see even that case, it is not going to go anywhere, and then we'll have another situation of a flare-up. There was this Adam Katsavelos who went to the Greek island, and there he called us by the K word, making a video about how there are no black people, there are no Kafas there on the island. It was peaceful and so on. And we also know that he got a slap. Vicky Mombek, who called the policeman with the K word over 49 times, she was out of jail within no time. And we see why students are continuing with their urination project against blacks, but because we were toilets to them. And you will see our rage will come out. We'll all talk about it for a week. We'll forget and go back to our rhythms of our lives. And white racism continues because we did not go to the institutional basis of white racism. To understand why the law does not punish white people, we have to understand the whole project of human rights. For instance, where it comes from and how it is based on the exclusion of black people. Go to the United States of America's Constitution, where it talks about everyone has freedom. But at the time, the authors of that document were slave holders. So there was no conception of our inclusion as black people in the notion of rights. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was promulgated by United Nations, South Africa itself was represented in the UN as an apartheid racist country. The colonialist countries which colonized Africa, which has kept us under oppression, had a universal declaration of human rights. So we are not part of those rights. And that is why you see that in the United States of America, the extension of human rights to black people through the civil rights process did not translate into the protection of black people, because the rights themselves are determined by the exclusions of black people. This is why black people today have no rights. They get shot, as we know, at will by the police. They are overrepresented in the prisons, in the death row. We do not have rights as black people. Rights are for humans, and humans are white people, and white people use these human rights precisely to exclude us. And that is why it's so difficult in South Africa to have rights that protects black people, because we have adopted the same white human rights project, which is predicated in the exclusion of black people. So we are unable to claim these rights because these rights are not organized in recognition of us as sentient beings, if you like, or people that carry these rights. I mean, you can see even with the situation of the LGBTI situation, where white LGBTI people are protected by the Constitution. The black lesbian in the township finds themselves caught up in the reality of lack of rights of all, and as a consequence vulnerable to the violence that consumes all in the township, in the black ghetto. There are no rights, there are no protections there. We live like animals, and we have to understand who generated the ghetto and the function of the ghetto in terms of reproducing the privileges that the white society enjoys. Without understanding that, we're going to continue to have these meaningless, occasional, even controlled processes of reacting to individual acts of racism. Professor Nellie Fuller, has told us already that white supremacy produces itself through, amongst others, self-sacrifice. So a few white people are sacrificed to maintain the totality of white power. So these will be your hobos, which are very visible. And when we see the hobos, that communicate the idea that white people also suffer poverty. So we must not, in a sense, be so upset about poverty, when in fact those are less than 5% of the white population. And more generally, there are people who have messed up their lives so that they find themselves in those conditions. But these white poor are so overrepresented in the imagination of society to hide the fact that, in fact, the people who are poor and excluded are black people. So the white system reproduces itself through normalizing these processes. And I want to argue that the white process in South Africa almost anticipate that black people will react in these ways when there are these individual acts of racism. And therefore we are failing to look at the machine that produces this racism, which is the institutionalized power which white people enjoys in South Africa. And that comes from their ownership, the economy, their ownership of knowledge production, their overrepresentation in symbolism, their overrepresentation in the management structures of society, and generally basically controlling the South African society. So we are not going to get justice as black people until the powers of whiteness is broken down and its institutional basis is destroyed. And only then can black people get justice, when we suffer acts of racism. Right now, acts of racism are, as we say, sanctioned by the white reality that we live under. We will not break down. The racism is not the misunderstanding between friends. Racism is not just what white people are taught at home. Racism is the reality that we all live, and the white child can see the difference in life chances between white and black. They can see at home, we are the servants. At school, the garden boy, the kitchen people cleaning after them are black people. And then they all go back to the township. The towns still remain by and large white. And why should a white child get the notion that they must respect black people? When we sing the national anthem, it is the national anthem of apartheid and a little bit of Nkosi Sikelel. Again, there's no clear break with the past, clear break with white power. And that is why we see racism in our schools and in our universities. Because the white child is not being taught about the crimes of whiteness, about the crimes that have put them in a position of privilege which they enjoy today. There is a systematic ignorance which is perpetuated by this system of democracy we live under, because we are all equal before the law. So we must pretend to be equal, and we must forget about history that has brought us where we are, where in reality we live two different types of lives. But yeah, that's what we must do. Go back to understanding the institutional basis of racism that sanctions individual acts of racism. And of course, as we've said in the past, when these individual acts of racism happen, we must intervene. And sometimes when we intervene directly, we get some kind of satisfaction through that process of interaction. But it does not end the institutionalized power of whiteness that constantly creates this reality. In fact, in conclusion, I think I want to quote what Toni Morrison have said about racism. She says, and I quote, "The very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over your reasons for being. Somebody says you have no language.